that he loved me. I am the Lord that he loved me. I am the Lord that he loved me. My boundless mercy shall endure. My boundless mercy shall endure. My boundless mercy shall endure. I love you with a steadfast love. I love you with a steadfast love. I love you with a steadfast love. In thee, O Lord, I put my trust. In thee, O Lord, I put my trust. In thee, O Lord, I put my trust. You may be seated.
The text for this morning will come from the chapter of John The book of John, rather, probably makes more sense, chapter 6, verses 16 through 21. At the point of this text, Jesus has just fed a crowd of thousands with 5 small loaves of bread and 2 fish. The people are so amazed by all that. They see what Jesus is capable of, so much so that they want to make him king, and they are so dedicated to making him king, they're willing to force Jesus to do that. Of course, Jesus isn't wanting to do that, and he also knows that getting into conflict with the people at this point is not going to make anything better. So he decides he's going to go off to the mountains to take some time to rest, to rejuvenate, to kind of take care of himself, and also avoid a potentially hostile situation that is brewing. As he does that, though, he leaves his disciples behind to kind of fend for themselves before they're going to head off in the next leg of their journey. That brings us then to the place of today's text, John chapter 6, verses 16 through 21. When evening came, his disciples went down to the lake, where they got into a boat and set off across the lake for Capernaum. By now it was dark, and Jesus had not yet joined them. A strong wind was blowing, and the waters grew rough. When they had rowed 3 or 3.5 miles, they saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water, and they were terrified. But he said to them, "It is I, don't be afraid." Then they were willing to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the shore where they were heading. Well, when I first started here, when we moved to Iowa, I had to travel back to South Dakota once a week because I was finishing up a contract I was under to teach Taekwondo on the reservation back there. And I had just a couple of months to wrap that up. So that meant that on my day off every week, I would get the kids off to school and I would make the long trek back to South Dakota. Now this was also winter time, which meant I was traveling a couple hundred miles, and you know that Midwest, when you travel a couple hundred miles in winter, you are going to encounter some kind of less than favorable conditions. Whether I was going to hit a little bit of snow somewhere along the way, or there was ice or snow on the roads, each and every week I hit at least somewhere along the way where it was not the greatest driving environment. Such is life in the Midwest. Until one of the very last times I was having to travel back, I set out, the sun was shining, the roads were perfectly clean and clear and dry the whole way there. It was just a great day to drive finally. So I taught my class for a few hours, and then I turned around to head home, and I found, much like you do in the Midwest, that in that few hours, the conditions and the environment had drastically changed. And a little while after I was on the road, started to snow lightly, and it kept picking up, and by the time I reached Albert Lee and was turning onto Interstate 35, road conditions were pretty tough. There were large patches where it was hard to see the road. Traffic was basically going in 2 slow lanes down the interstate where we all were moving together just trying to reach our destination. At each intersection, I kind of asked myself, should I just pull off and find a place to stay safely for the night and try again in the morning? But I would keep deciding to press on, to keep moving forward, to the point where once I turned then on the avenue, I decided, okay, I think I'm just going to do it. But I also found on the avenue, with the crosswinds and everything going, the conditions were even worse. Right? I couldn't see the road at all. There were times, much of the time, all I could see was white blowing at me, and I was basically navigating by listening for the noises you make when you get to the side of the road and they've got the ruts in, and I would hit them on one side, so then I would correct, and I would try and stay in the center until I would hear the ruts on the other side, and I would swerve back. And I made it home by just sort of listening for those noises and trusting, going very slowly. And ultimately, though, I turned off to the exit going into Charles City, and I was with a great deal of relief. I knew that if I went in the ditch at that point, I could walk home that couple of miles, and I was going to be okay. But that was the worst driving conditions I can ever remember driving in. My nerves were shot. I was just relieved to be home. But as I look back, I can truly see, as difficult as it was to drive in that environment, I can clearly see God's hand on everything throughout that. Because as I said, as I was driving there, the roads weren't just pretty good. The roads were perfectly clear. The roads had been perfectly dry earlier in the day, which meant as I was driving late and the conditions were bad, that even though I couldn't see the road, even if it was snow covered with an inch or two of snow on there in some spots, underneath it was still dry. So I didn't have to worry about hitting any icy patches. As I turned on the avenue and I was basically weaving back and forth between the ditches, I didn't encounter any other vehicles in that time. And so even though there was a lot of stress and fear and terror for me in that time of driving, God kept me safe. God was with me. God ensured things had been put in place that I could reach my destination safely. And we see that here as well, that Jesus Christ, even though he has left his disciples to fend for themselves at this point, everything is working. Jesus knows what is going on. He has set things in place, and he will yet come and make sure that his disciples reach their destination safely. For as I said, Jesus has gone up into the mountains at this point. He's a little bit drained. He's had some encounters with the Pharisees. He has gone and fed 5,000 people, but kind of been mobbed after that event. And he needs some time to rest, to rejuvenate, to spend with his Father and be filled back up so he can continue on in ministry. And he knows, he's met with his disciples. They know where they're going. They know where they want to end up. But now, as he's gone off for some time, it starts to get late, and his disciples need to start making some decisions on what they are going to do to make sure they get to their destination safely as well. The Sea of Galilee that they are by exists in kind of a valley area where it is surrounded by mountains, which means that, one, it gets very dark very quickly. As the sun starts to set, it's not long, and it's behind the mountains, and you can't see very much at all. It also, so they know, the disciples understand that they need to get moving on their journey while they still have a little bit of light to guide them. They know they need to get a certain distance out on the water so they have the moon and the stars reflecting off the water that can guide them the rest of the way. For these are experienced fishermen. For me, I think I'd be freaked out to go out on the water late at night. But these guys have made this journey enough that they know that they'll be able to see and have that moonlight guide them to safely as long as they get going, as long as they get set off. So they know it's getting late. They're prepared. They're waiting. They're hoping Jesus is going to arrive. But as time continues, Jesus is no place in sight. So they need to make that reluctant, inevitable decision. It's time to get underway. They know that Jesus understands where they're going. They know they'll be able to reconnect, but it's time to get moving forward. It's getting dark. The waters can be dangerous even for experienced fishermen, so it's time to get moving. They also understand that Jesus is a resourceful man. There's going to come a point in the next couple of days where they'll all get to their destination, And really, it can kind of seem strange for us, I think, to think the disciples were willing to just bail out and take off without Jesus. But it really was fairly common for them to spend time apart. You know, the disciples, as we read when we looked at Jesus and the woman at the well, there were times where they had to go off and kind of restock their supplies. The disciples oftentimes had family and people that they needed to go check on and care for. They had work and other responsibilities that they needed. So it really wasn't all that uncommon for them to be separated for periods of time. You know, it seems strange for us because so much of the Gospels we have talk about the time they're together, but they were also separate as well. But in this particular instance, though, I think it would have to be pretty discouraging for them. They were at a point of just extreme height where it's exhilarating. They saw Jesus take a couple of loaves of bread and a few fish and feed thousands of people and get the people really excited and rallied, and there had to be a great deal of excitement. But now, as they are separated, they know there's disappointment setting in. The sun is going down as well, and since it is in that mountain valley, it starts to get cold. We see that the winds start picking up, and you get some pretty good cross winds between those mountains as the winds start to get worse and worse. They're out on the water. They've got that cold water splashing in on them. Things are getting rough. You know, even for these experienced fishermen who have made this trek before, that storm can be pretty scary when you are out there on the water. You know, just as I've driven in snow many, many times in my life, it was still pretty scary to be out there in the middle, late at night with nobody else around. And if you've ever traveled the avenue between Mason City and here, you know that once you get past Mason City, you're stuck. You just have to keep going until you get home. There's no motels along the way, so I just had to keep pressing on whether I liked it or not. That's where the disciples are finding themselves out to sea as things are getting rough. There's no way they can just stop and rest, so they must press on. They have to press on without their leader. Danger is all around them. The sea continues to rage. There is no sign of relief as they press forward. John records that they're at least 3 miles out to sea at this point. There's no turning back. They've gone too far to just turn around and head back to safety, but they're also too far from reaching their destination to quickly get where they need to be. They're tired, they're sore, they're exhausted from long work and from fighting against the waves. And in the midst of all of this, they look out on the water and they see something quite unexpected. They saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water, and they were terrified. In the darkness, in the storm, they see something out there on the water. John identifies it as Jesus, but we see in the other parallel passages that recount this instance that they didn't automatically recognize it as Jesus. So we can see why they would be scary. They just see somebody floating on the water or creeping on the water to them. They think maybe it's a spirit or a ghost. Maybe the messenger of death is coming to get them in the midst of this violent storm. Certainly they wouldn't have figured it was Jesus, who they know they left a few miles back on the shore. In the midst of their struggles, they don't recognize Jesus. And I think we can get there as well so often in our struggles. As we face the hardships of life, as we look at all that is going on in our world, it is easy to ask ourselves, where is Jesus in all of this? What is God doing when we see all the desperation in our world? Yet we must recognize that He truly is always there. For God sent His Son Jesus into the world. And when Jesus went back up, He gave us the power of the Holy Spirit, that once we have taken Jesus as our Savior, we know we never walk alone. He never abandons us. We might not always be able to recognize all that Jesus is doing in our life, especially in the midst of struggles, but that doesn't mean He isn't there. For in the midst of our storms, we must pause. We must ask ourselves, where is Jesus in all of this? And recognize the mighty ways He is working all around us, even though we might face some struggles. And so, just as the disciples are out there, they see something coming at them. Terror is overtaking them. They don't think any man could be out walking on the water. Just as you look at this passage and you read what skeptics say about it, they'll oftentimes claim, well, Jesus, He wasn't really out there walking on the water. He was walking on the shore, and it just sort of looked like He was walking on top of the water in the storm and the dark. I've heard other skeptics say, oh, there was probably a nice little sandbar that He could walk out there on, and it sure sort of looked like He was doing something miraculous, but no. I heard one person say there were just big rocks and Jesus was a smart guy. He knew the rocks to walk on to get out to the boat. And that's where we really need to look at everything that John records. John says they were between, he gives specific measurements that in English translate to between 3 and 4 miles out there. They're almost to the middle of the sea at this point. And if you go out, you can go out to the Sea of Galilee. You can measure 3 miles out there and see that it's over 100 feet deep on the Sea of Galilee at that point. And 2,000 years ago, before some of the soil and sediment that's probably washed in over time, in fact, it was probably a good deal deeper than that. So we can be comfortable and know that there's no shoreline that big. There's no sandbar 3 miles out in any bar that you can walk on for miles in a body of water. There's no rock big enough to walk on that is 100 feet deep. Jesus is clearly, miraculously walking on the water. And in their moment of uncertainty, in their time of fear and questioning, as their fear mounts, they hear the voice of Jesus saying, "It is I. Don't be afraid." Jesus lets them know it is Him. It's going to be okay. Jesus is coming. Jesus shows them His presence, and they can know then that it is going to be okay. The disciples have the assurance that the one they have seen make blind men see, has healed lame, took a couple of scraps of food and fed thousands, is coming, and He's going to take care of everything. He brings calm to the situation as He lets the disciples know He is there. It's also important to make sure we're not getting our miracles mixed up to see the significance of what is going on here. Because we know that the Gospels record 2 instances of Jesus and His disciples out on the Sea of Galilee and the waters get rough. In the other instance, Jesus goes out on the water with His disciples, and then the storm arises, and Jesus, He's cool and calm about it. He's taking a nap. As the disciples are freaked out, then they wake Him up and say, "Hey, you need to do something." And Jesus, in that moment, takes away the storm. He ends the storm and their fears in that moment. But that's not the same thing that is going on here, and we can't confuse those. We need to recognize that, yes, sometimes Jesus calms the storms in our life. Sometimes Jesus miraculously moves those obstacles, those things that are freaking us out, those things that are causing us pain, and He removes those from our lives. But there are other times, and I think more often than not, when Jesus doesn't remove the storms from our life, but He lets us know that He is here, He is with us, even in the midst of the storm. Just as He lets the disciples know, "It is I, don't be afraid. And that's so often the way that Jesus works. Sometimes Jesus will remove an obstacle, a fear, a sickness, whatever, when that's the situation that is called for. But at other times, Jesus will come, He will let you know He is here, and He will walk with you through the struggles. As He says, "It is I, don't be afraid." Do not fear, because Jesus is there. He's going to walk with you. He is going to guide you through the storm. He will let you know that it's going to be okay, even though there will be moments where it is scary, where it is terrifying. Jesus lets us know we do not need to fear. Just as Jesus' words here didn't take away the storm, but it calms their fears. They have the assurance and relief that Jesus is there with them. They're so relieved. They bring Jesus into the boat, and by then they reach the shore.